Welcome to the Cage Corner Podcast, a podcast journey through the filmography of Nicolas Cage. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and so sorry that we do not have theme music for this spinoff show just yet. We are still talking with musicians about getting that taken care of. But if you guys are new to our show, our Nicolas Cage podcast differs just a little bit from other Nicolas Cage podcasts, and so just a couple of things to keep in mind. This is a spinoff from our mother show, Victims and Villains, a podcast where we educate and engage listeners on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. You guys can find episodes at victimsandvillains.net or wherever you guys get your podcasts from. And every film that we cover on this podcast is chosen by our patrons at our $5 tier. We are on this trajectory to cover every Nicolas Cage movie, and it wouldn't be possible without patrons like you. So thank you so much for supporting us and helping us get mental health resources into schools for as little as $5 a month. You guys can help us in this Nicolas Cage journey, or just get access to exclusive content and mental health resources into schools and conventions for as little as $1. It's patreon.com/victims and villains. On this episode, we are going to be doing a more of a theater/double feature style. And up first, we have one of our writers is doing Vampire's Kiss. So take it away, Alan.
Thanks, Josh. I'm Alan.
And I'm Devin.
And we host You Have to Watch This podcast, where every week we and our other co-host Ryan, who's not with us tonight, make each other watch movies that the other one hasn't seen. One of us hasn't seen.
Yeah, I mean, our movies run the gamut. I mean, anywhere from classic sci-fi movies to rom-coms to Marvel movies. I mean, it's a lot. We cover a lot of movie ground, I think, in our podcast.
Yeah, we do. And we also get away from movies sometimes and do TV shows. We do some triple features. We pick a theme and each bring our own movie into the conversation and compare 3 different movies. We did a video game movie triple feature.
Time travel.
So we do a whole lot of fun stuff. So if you want to, you can join us wherever you find podcasts. It's You Have to Watch This podcast. But today, we're sticking to our format a little bit, but putting a twist on it. This is a film that neither of us had seen going into it. Today we're talking about the Nick Cage film, Vampire's Kiss.
Oh, man. So if you want, I could take lead on this, because actually Alan reached out to me and was like, hey, you're going to be on a Cage Corner. What Nicolas Cage movie do you want to do? And I go, which ones have you done? And he told me the ones you've done, and this gem of a movie was still available. Alan, did you know anything about this movie when I recommended it?
I knew Nick Cage was in it, and that was it.
Oh, boy. So I internet occasionally. So I knew the parts of this movie that percolated up to the internet. And now I actually genuinely feel bad for anyone else who does the Cage Corner, because I feel like we accidentally took the best one.
We may have. We took the most memed Nick Cage movie, I think.
I think we did.
If you search Nick Cage in any GIF search bar, I feel like GIFs from this movie are the first 3 or 5.
Oh, yeah. And like scenes for this movie make like Nicolas Cage freakout compilations constantly.
Yes, and we'll get into the details of this. So, since this was the first time we both watched this, what did you think?
I love it. Unequivocally. Okay, so here's my philosophy on Nicolas Cage in this movie, right? Alan, I don't always love salt and vinegar chips. But sometimes I'm really in the mood for salt and vinegar chips. Sometimes I think they're overbearing, too salty, too much, too loud. In general, today I was really in the mood for salt and vinegar chips in the same way that this movie is exactly that. Sometimes Nicolas Cage is too loud, too much, too boisterous, but this movie just hit right today. This was, I had the best morning watching this movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to. I didn't know what was going on for most of the movie, because the movie is about a man who thinks he's becoming a vampire.
Right.
And like just passively watching it, like I was doing other stuff while it was on, I was like, okay, so he's turning into a vampire. And then you realize, oh, no, he's not. Like, he just thinks he is, which For a movie that came out in the 80s, I'm surprised that this might be the most quintessential Nick Cage movie of Nick Cage movies. Like, it is so insane, just in concept alone. But then you have his acting, and it's like, what did I just watch?
My favorite part about this, so I did some research on the movie beforehand. He was given the script, turned it down, and then came back because he was obsessed with the script. So, like, these choices are real choices he made. This was not a mistake.
That's amazing to me.
I love it. So, for background on the movie, like Alan said, it's a 1988 movie. It's directed by Robert Bierman and written by Joseph Minion. And I want to talk about that a little bit later. But it stars Nicolas Cage, Maria Alonso, and Jennifer Beals. I think one of them is from Dirty Dancing. Dirty Dancing, is that...
No, Jennifer Beals was in Flashdance.
That's what I'm thinking. I get those movies mixed up all the time.
Have you seen either of those movies?
Never.
Oh, boy.
Add it to the list.
I'm adding it to the You Have to Watch This podcast list.
Oh, no. Which one? Both?
At least Dirty Dancing.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever seen Flashdance.
I know it takes place in Pittsburgh. So I'm really glad you like this movie. And I learned a lot about it. So watching the movie, I love Nicolas Cage's performance. It's fun. It's quirky. It's definitely a take. And I think it carried most of the movie for me. But afterwards, I had this weird feeling where I was like, what is this movie saying about Nicolas Cage and about women? And I wanted to do a little bit of research into it to make sure this movie wasn't like super not great about women. And actually, it was written at a time when the writer, what's his name, Joseph Minion, was in a toxic relationship. And this was kind of his catharsis for the toxic relationship. And it was actually so close to what his real relationship was like. After he wrote it, he gave it to, I think it was his girlfriend at the time. And she went, oh no, I'm the vampire character. And like was afraid to show it around Hollywood because apparently their relationship was so close to that vampire character that like it got too personal for her. So like I like that layer of the movie so much now.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
See, I thought I knew the name Joseph Minion from something else, but looking at his IMDb, I can't think of anything that is jumping out at me.
His really big one, and the reason that this one got made is because of After Hours, which I think was Coppola, if I'm not wrong. Scorsese. It was Scorsese. And, I mean, that was enough to get whatever he did next.
Okay. Speaking of the next projects, looking at Nicolas Cage's IMDb, this is the movie he did right after Moonstruck.
I don't know if I know Moonstruck.
Moonstruck was Nicolas Cage with Cher.
Oh, weird.
It was like his coming out party. Like that's where a lot of people like, oh, damn, who is this? Who's this guy?
So was he as Nicolas Cage in that one?
I haven't seen it in years. But it won Best Screenplay.
Nice.
And it was nominated for Best Picture the year before. So
okay.
He wasn't nominated, but Cher was.
Oh. So I want to talk about him because there's so much to dissect about him in this movie. First off, What accent is he doing?
I don't know.
It took me so long. I don't know either.
It's one of those unidentifiable accents, I think, like Moira Rose on Schitt's Creek. Like, Catherine O'Hara doesn't know what accent she's doing. She's just doing something for the character. I feel like that's kind of what's going on here.
It's like he oscillates between like surfer dude and like bad British every once in a while.
Yeah. Is he trying to maybe go for like a Transylvanian accent? Like a modern day take on that?
I don't know, but that would be like another great layer to this, is if he actually was.
Because looking at some of the trivia, like there are scenes in this that like things that he does that are straight out of Nosferatu, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Let me see where I can find it.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised because they really hit Nosferatu hard in this one. Like, I mean, I think there's even a part where he just shouts Nosferatu a lot. Yeah, it says, at first he might seem strange behavior, over-the-top acting, but Nicolas Cage meanders through the crowd in the club scene and up to when he attacks the girl. You'll notice he's actually mimicking the movements of Nosferatu in the original vampire film of the silent era.
Okay.
So, I mean, he's doing the Nosferatu in the movie, it looks like.
Yeah, they pull a lot from vampire lore because there's a lot of references to Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
With the cockroaches.
Side note, that was a real cockroach. He actually, apparently he was afraid of cockroaches. He actually ate a real one on set, and they had to do that take twice. So he ate 2 real cockroaches for this movie.
And I guess he got a lot of flack for that in the 80s from animal rights activists, and pretty much just shoved it in their face and like, have you ever used a can of Raid? And then they're like, well, and then hung up the phone.
Well, we'll forget about that, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, just so much about his performance in this just blows my mind. Like some of the choices he makes, I can't get over.
What is the one moment that you look at in this film that is pure Nick Cage? Like if you had to put Nick Cage in, there was a thing before called encyclopedias. You had to put Nicolas Cage in an encyclopedia. What scene from this movie would you put in there?
I mean, it's the scene that got the most famous from this. It's when he's talking to his therapist about alphabetizing. And he's like, I know alphabetizing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And he just like goes through the alphabet like that. It's genius.
For me, I think it's the scene where he's yelling at his secretary and that gif of
where his face
that Nicolas Cage face, you don't say.
Yeah.
Like that Nicolas Cage face is in this movie.
It's in it a lot. Like you even watch him practice it in the mirror in this movie.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments in this is when he's looking in the mirror and doesn't see himself, but you see his reflection.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments like that where he like hands nobody tea or like invites someone into the shower, but it's nobody.
Yeah.
I like that.
Okay, so do you think he ever actually got with Jennifer Beals' character, the vampire?
No, I don't. I really think she denied him, and I think that character is so used to not being denied that he made it up, like the person he made up at the end.
Okay.
What about you?
Do you think he ever? Well, I don't think he ever got with her. I think they did have an encounter. He got rejected, and then the rest of the movie. Do you think he ever actually saw a therapist?
No, I mean, I thought he did almost the whole time until that end scene where he's like talking to a post or a mailbox or something. I think the therapist is entirely inside his brain, and it's his way to rationalize all of it.
And I do like that they hide that reveal until the very end of the film, because there is a moment where he's like, I think I need help. Mm-hmm. And she's like, okay, well, I can see you first thing Tuesday. No, it needs to be sooner. Okay, Monday afternoon. Sooner.
Yeah.
Monday morning at 7:30. I'll come in early. Okay. I like that they hid that reveal. They did a good job of hiding the reveals until the end of everything. So even if you pick up on the fact that he's not actually turning into a vampire early on, the whole therapist reveal hides itself until the end.
Yeah. And I think that's cool. And I also like the little thing that they do where like the therapist also has this like sexy guy behind her who like, they're in a relationship, like, because that's what he is like solely focused on in this movie.
Yeah, I swear I just saw that guy who comes up behind the therapist in an episode of Murder, She Wrote my wife was watching.
Really?
Yeah. It's weird, but I think that's a thing that happened.
I wouldn't be surprised. He seems like the kind of person that would be there.
I'm just looking at the cast quick. I missed David Hyde Pierce in this.
Where was he?
He's credited as theater guy.
Theater guy. When was he in a theater? Maybe
that's what I'm wondering.
Maybe I missed that part too? That's so weird. Yeah. Huh. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember that either.
I mean, but there was so much in this movie. Like every scene was just insane.
Mm-hmm. And even if like David Hyde Pierce was in a scene, I'm sure Nicolas Cage stole it. So
Oh, absolutely.
I just find it weird that of the 2 Cage corners I've been on, it's been with both of the Crane brothers from Frasier.
Oh, that's cool.
Because the first one was Grand Isle, and that was with Kelsey Grammer. So Frasier Crane, now Niles Crane is in this one, and I missed him.
That's so funny though. So the one thing I did find out about this, and I wonder how this movie would have turned out if this happened, but this movie was originally cast with Dennis Quaid. Would you have watched this movie if it was Dennis Quaid?
Are we talking 80s Dennis Quaid or modern day Dennis Quaid?
I want modern day, but no, it would have been like very 80s Dennis Quaid.
I would rather see this movie with Randy Quaid.
Randy.
Just cousin Eddie.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Apparently they also approached Steve Martin with this, who was really interested, and I think he would do a really cool take of this.
I would definitely want to see that.
Yeah.
I saw a few other names pop up, and none of them were those.
No.
I also saw Judd Nelson.
Judd Nelson.
From The Breakfast Club. Stallone. Yeah, John Travolta and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You know what? I think we got the perfect cast for this.
I think any one of those would be crazy.
Yeah.
Because I can hear any of them running around New York. I'm a vampire! Like, I'm a vampire!
That actually might be amazing, though.
And then Stallone's like, you just can't understand him.
No. I mean, that scene at the end where he's, like, hobbling around, like, with that, like, plank of wood that he thinks is a stake. Like, I would love to see, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger doing that.
Okay, so we need to talk about Nicolas Cage's apartment in this.
Okay.
Because he destroys the hell out of it.
Oh, yeah, he does.
And according to IMDb trivia, that was all real set furniture. Like, that wasn't props or anything. So that glass was all real glass.
Oh, no.
So they only had one take to do it. And the director afterwards, like, I don't know what I was thinking. Like, that was he got way too insane for me to actually have done that. And I'm so glad that it turned out well and he didn't get hurt.
All right. So I don't know if you say this in trivia, but I definitely got this sense, and I want to know how true it is. I feel like in some scenes in the script, they were just Nicolas Cage does Nicolas Cage. And they just like pointed a camera at him and went, be crazy. And he did.
See, I don't know if Nicolas Cage, I guess he had a few things before this.
But I guess he wasn't as established as like a freak out artist at that point, was he?
No, I think this is what put him on the map is that. I think he does freak out a bit in Moonstruck.
Okay.
But I don't know. I wouldn't really think of him as the freak out guy quite yet.
So what did this movie do for his career then? Because Moonstruck, you said, was like his coming out. People were like, oh, look, a serious actor.
That was like his big one. Like, okay, so he was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High in 82.
But he wasn't like a big deal in that, was he?
No, I don't think so. Because he still went by his family's real name. So.
Oh, okay.
Do you know his family's real name?
Is it Coppola?
It is Coppola.
I knew that.
He's one of the Coppolas.
Yep, that's where I got Coppola from.
So before Vampire's Kiss, he was in Peggy Sue Got Married, Raising Arizona, Moonstruck, and then this.
Okay.
So he was in a few things that I guess were
like Raising Arizona is a big deal, even though he hated the directors.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this might be the first freak out Nicolas Cage.
Oh, but it's like
for the whole movie.
Yeah,
like, I'm sure he has scenes here and there in his other stuff, but I think he's pretty much full tilt Nicolas Cage this whole movie.
And it just like feels so pure. Like it doesn't feel like he's playing a character. Like he's playing a character of himself freaking out. It feels like these are specific acting choices he's making.
Yes. My favorite thing about this movie is his homemade coffin.
The couch?
Where he did with the couch.
Yeah.
Like
it's he tries to get all of the vampire iconography, which I like. And like I think I'm trying to think of the impetus of that. Was it just the vampire bat? Like he like saw the bat fly in the window one night and he was like, that's what's happening in his mind, or
the way I interpreted it
Mm-hmm.
was he sees the bat come in his window
Mm-hmm.
and he's with a woman and he finds himself aroused. And then he becomes obsessed with the idea that he's becoming a vampire. And my wife's in the other room having not watched this movie. I'm sure she's like, what the heck is he talking about?
I mean, typical Nicolas Cage stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much.
I think that's how I interpreted it. Like he was actually with that woman at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then the bat did come in and he's like, oh, a bat. Like,
and he like accidentally related the two things.
Yeah.
I can see that. So, okay, this is the one part I think that confused me a little bit is I don't think I'm on board with liking Nicolas Cage's character apart from the freakouts almost at any point in this movie. Like even at his best when he's not mentally breaking down into a vampire, I don't think I got a good I want to root for this character moment.
It's just watching a character descend into madness.
Right.
And I don't think you're supposed to like him because he's not a likable character in any sense.
No.
Because he's horrible to his secretary.
Mm-hmm.
He straight up murders a woman in a nightclub.
Well, does he rape the secretary?
That's what they implied.
Yeah.
That's what she implied. That's what she says.
And that's what he tells the therapist at the end.
Yeah.
By the way, that scene got me. Like I was laughing
with the therapist at the end.
Yeah. Well, I think I murdered a woman. They murder people all the time in New York. Don't you worry about it. Like I was getting serious The Room vibes from that, and I loved it.
So one thing, the vibes I was getting throughout this, and it kind of makes sense after the fact, reading up on it, I was getting a lot of American Psycho vibes.
That was actually recommended to me on Apple Play next, was American Psycho.
Supposedly, Christian Bale based a lot of his character on Nicolas Cage in this movie.
Really?
Yeah. Have you seen American Psycho?
I have. I can totally see that.
I can too, and it makes complete sense to me.
With a lot of his eccentricities.
Yeah, there was a lot less Huey Lewis in the news in this, which is okay. I've got it on vinyl. I don't need it in my movies all the time. If I want it in my movies, I'll just put it in Back to the Future. So
it's true though. Speaking of, what was the soundtrack to this movie? Did it have any? I don't remember any music or anything, but I know it had to have happened.
I didn't really pick up on anything, and I'm usually the soundtrack guy.
Yeah, that's why I asked. The one I did love was that opening shot, or that opening scene of New York City to the sexy, haunting jazz music. I was like, this is setting a good tone for this movie.
Yeah, this movie does a lot of landscape shots of New York during sunrise and sunset,
which is cool.
Yeah, there's a whole day where it's just that, just to show that he's been sleeping all day because he's a vampire now. You see the sun come up, and then you see the sun go back down, and there's a lot of just 80s glamour shots of the sunset with the New York skyline in front of it.
Oh yeah,
I could see those being backgrounds on my computer.
And they look gorgeous too. Even now, I watched this on, I think it was Apple TV on my phone, but it still looked really good for what it was.
Yeah, you actually paid money for this, didn't you?
I'm not upset. This was the best $4 I've ever spent in my life.
Yeah, I ended up getting it for free legally.
Oh.
Because I subscribed to my local library system. And libraries will have books and DVDs in their locations, but many of them also have digital, video, and book libraries.
Weird.
So I was able to go on a site called Hoopla and get this for free through my local library.
That's really cool, actually. I didn't know they did that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
This episode brought to you by public libraries.
Yes. So support your local library, because, and make sure you return your stuff if it's physical, because then they get you with the fines.
I've never done, I never return my stuff. I think I'm wanted in 3 counties in Pennsylvania or something because of library fines.
Probably.
It sounds about right.
They have your list. They have your mugshot up every time I go in there.
I bet. Oh,
So.
That's funny.
All right. Is there anything else we want to talk about with Vampire's Kiss?
Let me think, because I mean this movie's just a gem. Like I think that I think this movie is now going to be a part of my Halloween rotation, because I need this at least once a year, I think.
I might watch it once or twice.
Yeah.
But like every other year maybe, but not every year.
Well, like here's the thing is I didn't know this was supposed to be billed as a comedy. Like this, according to IMDb, this is a horror comedy. It's supposed to be, and I haven't genuinely laughed at a comedy like this in a long time. And I don't know if I was laughing at the right parts. Like, I don't know if I was laughing at the punchlines of jokes or just why is Nicolas Cage doing this on screen for people to watch? But like, I got to the point where like my wife had to come down and say, "What are you watching?" Because like I was on the couch just rolling like with laughter sometimes because it was so funny.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Like I didn't think it was going to be a comedy going in.
Yeah.
Like Vampire's Kiss, I really just assumed it was like a horror romance.
Yeah.
Instead of what we got, which is fantastic Nicolas Cage performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just watch it. I recommend it to anyone. Like,
if you had to give it a letter grade, would you give it an A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Like, what would you give it?
I would give it a B. I would give it a solid B.
I would give it a. I'm a vampire. No, I'd give it a B minus.
A B minus?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair grade for it. I mean, it's not like the best movie I've ever seen, but like it is so freaking fun.
You don't say. Real quick before we do wrap this up,
Yeah.
I just remembered about the scene where he gets the gun from his secretary.
Oh yeah,
and then like shoots himself in the head multiple times, and it's all blanks.
Right.
I was like, why are they making such a big point out of her having blanks in this gun? And then that happens. Like, oh, okay.
But that's what I like. Is it's like I got mad at the vampire scene or the bat scene where he was like, I felt like aroused by the bat, and I was like, that's stupid. And then they drop it, but they don't drop it. Like
they don't drop it. It's pretty much the rest of the movie,
right?
Like.
And I think that's so freaking clever. Like, I like that a lot.
All right. Well, I think that does it for this segment of the Cage Corner. So, again, if you liked what you heard here, you can check us out on You Have to Watch This podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at You Have to Watch This podcast. So, until next time, I'm Alan.
And I'm Devin.
And back to you, Josh.
And we're going to end this episode of Cage Corner podcast on a spooky note. Since it is Halloween, one of our patrons wanted us to cover the 2015 film Pay the Ghost with Nicolas Cage, and I'm joined by staff writer Mr. Mark Moore.
Hello.
Well, let's jump into this because this is an interesting film to talk about. This is basically a grief story about a father's journey to kind of like find his kid after he goes missing on Halloween night, and somehow that journey ends up to be the Celtic version of La Llorona. So general thoughts on this movie.
I actually kind of enjoyed it. I watched it with my wife, who kind of got upset about the way they portrayed the crone because she's done studies into that kind of stuff, but I liked it. I thought it was decent. It falls into another one of the Nicolas Cage horror movies that he's becoming famous for over the last 5 to 10 years. It was a decent movie overall. It wasn't nothing mind blowing or great, but it was still fun to watch.
So I'm kind of in the same camp with you. I did enjoy this movie. There are a lot of issues that I have with this movie, but not nearly as much as I had with The Curse of La Llorona, which was The Conjuring universe's attempt at that Mexican folklore. And also at the same time, I have not watched the Shudder version of La Llorona. But this film right here, I think you're right. Like it had slowly becomes that signature Nicolas Cage horror movie that he's becoming known for in more recent years. But in my opinion, this movie took way too long to build. The entire first half of this movie feels disjointed from the back half of this movie. And that's the kind of stuff that I would have wanted a little bit more, like all of the exploration of him as a father. I feel like didn't really bring anything to the overall story. Like all of the first 45 minutes could have been done within the first 15. I feel like the mythos and the folklore didn't have any time to breathe. They just feel so rushed once you bring in the medium.
So you keep comparing it to La Llorona or The Curse of La Llorona. I kind of felt it more off and on. It resembled the original Candyman, where she was investigating what had happened in this apartment building with the Candyman and stuff, and the disappearance of the kid. In this case, it felt more like that because the kid was taken. You knew you kind of knew who took the kid, and he was trying to figure out where the kid was. So I was more along the lines of thinking it kind of felt more like a Candyman kind of story than The Curse of La Llorona. That's just me, though.
I can definitely see that, especially just because the fact that I just watched Candyman here recently. We just released an episode on it not that long ago, but for me, it becomes the Curse of La Llorona and kind of the La Llorona story set in a Celtic backdrop. Once you introduce a lot of like the mythos of the last like half hour.
Yeah, that just kind of, okay, this is what the story is behind the ghost within like the last 20-30 minutes maybe. Yeah, if that hadn't just kind of been thrown in last second, it was just kind of like, okay, now we need to explain what this ghost was. We've been building up for the entire movie, and let's make it a Celtic religious thing. It's just kind of what kind of seemed to happen. But I look at movies as each movie their own thing. So stuff like that, as annoying as it could be, doesn't really take away from me. Yeah. But I get it. I get it, though, that it was just kind of thrown in last second like that.
Yeah, it just, again, like I feel like had the first like 45 minutes been shortened down to like 15 to 20 minutes, heck, maybe even 10 minutes, where you're kind of setting up like he's a father that clearly works too much. He clearly wants to be there for his kid, and his kid, depends on that father-son relationship time. I would have been okay with that. Like that exploration of kind of establishing like the kind of relationship that he has with his kid, how he's constantly working, all of that stuff could have been done within the first 10 minutes.
Or alternatively, started bringing in the story behind the crone earlier and started stumbling across what it is and getting more hints instead of the last 20-30 minutes. We found a book that says it's this. So
that's the thing too, is that this film opens up on the 16th century backdrop of the crone, and you get to see the kids, and by the time that you bring that back, that opening shot, it's like 2 or 3 minutes, but it feels like an afterthought until you bring in these are who these kids are, and this is why that opening shot exists.
Yeah, the opening scene didn't really tell you much, though. Like, if you really watch it, it's paid attention. It's just two kids, and they show a couple pagan symbols, and then the two kids get dragged off. It doesn't really explain much other than kids were taken. So was it the backstory of the crone, or was it some more kids that she took? They didn't really make that clear at the beginning.
And by the time that the film actually establishes like who those kids were and why we were open up on them, it almost feels like an afterthought. Like, I don't know about you, but by the time that we got there, like, there was a part of me that had almost completely forgotten about that opening scene because it just didn't seem that important by the time that, you know, you switch to modern day. And this film explores a lot of like the real life events of like what a grieving father or like what a paranoid father would look like, you know, how that would impact the marriage. And I feel like when it dives into that grounded realism, the film does a really good job. Like, the, you know, here you have a dad that clearly has working too hard, Nicolas Cage. It hasn't affected necessarily his marriage, but it's affected his relationship with his son. Like, there's a point in the movie where he comes and he's like dressed up and he's like, you know, I want to take you to the carnival, and he's like, no, he's like, I'm sorry, like, you know, something along the lines of, you know, you're my favorite person. He's like, you know, like a dad's promise is sacred. And so he's like trying to make it up to his kid, and like that part is like really admirable. And but then you're kind of seeing the fallout of that, you know, him and his wife are now separated 1 year later. Like, they live in separate apartments. Like, he's almost a husk of like who he used to be, because we see him as a college professor very early on, and he's very much alive, like almost kind of like a Shakespearean teacher. And I loved that aspect of the film, that he's very much alive, like he's very passionate about this job. And then you see him 1 year later and he's just very, very humbug. He's very dry, almost feels like Ebenezer Scrooge, but he's also like very focused and fixated on finding his son. And just, I don't know, like a lot of the build up to the supernatural stuff just feels so long-winded.
Yeah, it felt almost secondary to anything else. Because, like you said, at the beginning, he was working so hard to get his tenure at the university, and he gets it, he's all excited, and he misses carving pumpkins with his son because he's so busy working to get his tenure at the college he's at, and recognizes a professor. And they go to the carnival, and kid gets taken, and then he's just, I'm investigating and trying to figure out what happened to my son. And it almost seems like they're hinting at one point that he might need to almost not quit, but just take a leave to deal with his issues. During a conversation with was it the dean, the character that finds who the crone is, hints that he might need to take a leave of absence to deal with his stuff. And it just, yeah, it really does almost feel like two separate 30-minute movies combined with a little bit of connecting story in the middle.
And I don't know about you, but I felt like Mike kind of contradicts himself, because when you're looking at how he's actually approaching finding his son 1 year later, he's looking at the, you know, prime suspects, which in this case are going to be sex offenders or people that have violence rap sheets of abducting children. You know, he's considering human trafficking and stuff along like that, like stuff that's very much set in the realism, like this world that we think. And his wife is like when him and his wife kind of like stop being estranged and start to come together to find his kid, they are like, maybe we should contact a medium or a psychic. And
so that psychic scene, the medium scene, I almost broke out laughing because I thought we were getting ready to have a "it's all for you, Damien" moment. I really did. When she went to the window and opens it, I'm like, oh no, they just like ripped this from Damien. And then something else completely different happens. But it was like, here we go. It's going to be all for you. So, yeah, sorry.
No, but I feel like at that moment, like he's like very definitively saying like, hey, we're not gonna go to these people because they're hoax. Like they're all frauds. And then like the next time we see him, like he's like very invested into this like psychic medium coming to tell him where his kid is and like how to get back to it. And it almost feels like the characterization of the parents switches in that moment.
Kinda. He was looking into sex offenders and molesters and kidnappers and stuff. And then he started hearing when he was putting up posters, he started hearing what he thought was his kid calling him. And then he sees his kid on the bus. And after he starts seeing these supernatural things, and that's when he kind of started leaning towards that being a possibility. And then the wife starts seeing some of this stuff too, like with the scooter. And that's when they kind of came together on let's get a medium. It wasn't just like okay, let's do it kind of switch. It took place after some supernatural things kind of happened on both sides of the story for the mom and Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, and to me, like that's kind of where the disjointedness lies for this movie. I thought that like both parts of this movie, whether you're talking about the realism or the supernatural, like they work. But it's just very like a very sudden like tonal shift once you enter into the medium.
Yeah, I think either story would have worked better if they had either more almost investigating into the ghost itself, so you start learning more earlier to kind of tie the beginning to the end, as opposed to just everything at the end, or take the supernatural part out and he finds his kid a year later after he's been kidnapped. Either way would have been the better movie. It would have been the better storyline and more coherent.
So let's talk about like how they kind of build up the supernatural aspect, because like his kid sees what he considers a ghost, and he considers also this like vulture. And I don't know about you, but the scene in particular where he's looking out the window and he sees just this giant shadow monster engrossing the city of New York, it felt like the monster from Starfish or Swamp Thing, where you just kind of see this like super generic shadow monster, and they try to like kind of like plant the seeds with the kid for this like supernatural movie. But like, how did you feel like about like that aspect of it?
So I actually thought more of like the end of Ghostbusters with the clouds and everything opening up and the ghost coming down. But it's such a common thing to see that in movies in general, especially with supernatural. It's always the kids seeing it first and, oh, mommy, look at this, and drawing weird stuff that it's almost generic and almost overused to me as a plot point or developing sequence. But yeah, they kind of let you know at the beginning with it that this is going to be some sort of ghost. The parents don't believe him. Something's going to happen to the kid. And that's what that whole sequence kind of leads to, but then it's forgotten when you get to the beginning of the kid's gone and you're at the beginning of Nicolas Cage looking at trying to figure out what happened to his kid. You lose that whole supernatural aspect for a little while.
So one thing that I noticed about these films in particular that kind of showcase like Halloween times, like the Halloweens are always like super generic. Like it always feels like you always have like pirates, you always have skeletons, ghosts, and even by the time that we get to the Celtic Halloween celebration at the end of the movie, it feels like it just kind of feels a little bit generic. And like I don't know, like I kind of wanted a little bit more out of like the Halloween sequences. They felt like kind of rushed, but like the Saruman, I think that's how you say it. The very end of the movie with the Celtic and the teacher, I felt like was done a lot better than it was with the, you know, just kind of like this, like they want to do the like the Day of the Dead celebration without doing the Day of the Dead celebration, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, almost like a Day of the Dead from another culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. It felt, all the Halloween stuff in general felt generic, but it's Halloween. So unless you get into like another superstitious country, you're not going to see much different with Halloween celebrations in general. Skeletons, ghosts, pirates, those are like the most recognizable Halloween costumes and Halloween stuff in general, without having to pull any licenses for showing something else that might have been licensed to something else. It's just the most generic Halloween you can have. And I mean, it wasn't a big budget movie either, so it was going to be as generic as you could get, but still show what you wanted to show.
So Jack Skellington makes an appearance in this very briefly. He's one of the skeletons on stilts. I don't know if you caught that.
I think it was just the mask, wasn't it?
No, I mean, it might have been, but like it looks like Jack Skellington, which I just kind of thought was funny is that by this point, like, I don't know why, like, but there's a meme that is like Homer Simpson in a bar, and it's like every year around Halloween there'll be like Halloween whatever year it is, and like last year I think it was Harley Quinn and like Pennywise. Like those were the things that you were gonna see when you took your kids trick or treating or go to like Halloween parties. And I don't know, like I just had the thought, like when you go to that Day of the Dead celebration, I'm just like, Halloween parties don't really look like this, for one, and for two, there's going to be a lot more pop culture infusion at something like this. But man, I don't know why. Like, I was like all about that scene. Like, I kind of want to go to New York this year for Halloween just to see if they do something like this, because that party looked awesome.
Well, it also looked like it was like a 2-block party.
Yeah.
Like it was just an alley that took up 2 blocks of New York. So that's what it looked like to me. We had a couple alleys that connected between some buildings and everybody got together to throw down. So it was just another movie Halloween party is just how it came across to me. Kind of almost like the was it the Day of the Dead or Halloween in Candyman 2. They had one of those big parties like that, and the second one, and it reminded me of the same thing.
That's interesting. So what are some things that you enjoyed about this movie? Because I feel like we've spent all this time just kind of like tearing into parts about like how it's bad, but we both liked this movie. So let's kind of end on a happy note.
So if you look at it as what it is, as a movie for entertainment, and it's low budget. It's not a big Hollywood straight to theater blockbuster. It has its points that it's an overall decent, entertaining ghost story with a handful of small jump scares in it. And it is an enjoyable movie now that we're kind of done talking crap about it for the last who knows how long. It is an enjoyable movie overall. It just wasn't a great movie by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I jumped on my Letterboxd account afterwards, and I gave this a 3 out of 5. I feel like that's like, it's entertaining enough. Nicolas Cage is really good in this movie, but it like that like Frankenstein approach to the narrative is just kind of where it ventures into just forgettable territory, because it feels almost like you have this through line of trying to find the kid, but yet you have these narratives about him going missing and kind of like how that affects, and like all of that is set very much in this like very grounded approach. But then you have this other story that is a Celtic folklore and set in supernatural, and you're like supposed to believe that like these like little nuggets that you're placing in the realism is supposed to expand into this. And at first I was kind of like, all right, like it's very subtle. It's like a very subtle shift, the way that they're like, hey, we're just gonna welcome in this medium, and it's like, okay, I guess I can get behind this. And then it's just like that realism just kind of gets flushed right down the toilet, because even the detective that is on the case is like starting to kind of take the supernatural seriously, and that again feels like totally for him. But even as this film contradicts itself, like it's still an entertaining film. Like I didn't walk away from it being like, oh man, like that was boring, that was crap. Like you said, like it's low budget, and you know, I think that had it not been for those tonal shifts, this movie would have been like rewatchable. But to me, I feel like it just kind of like ventures into like almost like forgettable territory by the time you get done with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a one and done kind of movie. You watch it one time for its entertainment value, and that's pretty much it.
Well, let's talk about Nicolas Cage, because this is a Nicolas Cage podcast. How do you think Nicolas Cage's performance stands out in this movie?
So he seemed like the happy father at the beginning, which he's always done a good job on, even back to, was it The Family Man, which was, what was that, A Wonderful Life remake almost. He's always been good at that kind of stuff. He did seem a touch flat through the investigating portion, but when he started getting into the supernatural aspect of stuff, the touch of crazy that is Nicolas Cage started to come out. So I mean, that's my thought on how he did. He's always played the happy-go-lucky father part well. And yeah.
So a friend of mine does a book called Necroman, and Necroman is basically the story about this like superhero, the Superman archetype that basically dies and then is resurrected as a zombie version of the hero. And I feel like this movie is kind of like that series, to where it's like the first issue is like very campy, but once you kind of get into the second issue and you start to get more into the horror elements of it, it becomes like this like top tier like independent book. And that's kind of how I feel about his performance throughout the course of this, is that you have this very just kind of like lukewarm performance that I feel like he's like, you know, typical like I think when you talk about Family Man, like Family Man's a great example of that kind of like father figure that Nicolas Cage is able to embrace. And then you get into the supernatural stuff, and like that's where I feel like Nicolas Cage is like able to like really kind of like bring it to his peak. Like he's able to kind of have that hero journey. And to me, honestly, I don't know about you, but so the one of the last month's Patreon picks was the National Treasure movies.
Right.
And it kind of like almost like the ending where he's like bringing his kid back from the other side. When the bridge breaks, it feels like that National Treasure moment where it's like he's got to save his partner and he's going to bring it up because time's running out. Like, I don't know why I just made that comparison, but Nicolas Cage is just good at those kind of roles, I feel like.
So I pretty much, as soon as they said stuff about it closes at midnight earlier in the movie, I kind of knew that was coming. It was either going to be him throwing his son across the breach to get through and him end up getting stuck, or something along the lines of what happened. Yeah, he does well with his facial expressions and the way he acts in these movies like this, and his craziness and color out of space. He's always done well in stuff like that, just because he looks completely insane half the time when he plays something. He's really in the last, was it maybe 5 years, 10 years, he's really resurrected his career as an actor by just doing like tons of almost limited release or straight to horror movie or straight to video horror.
I love, like, those are the aspects of Nicolas Cage's career that I love, and I was so thankful that the patron that recommended this, Matt, wanted us to do this film. I was like, okay, I've never heard of this movie, I've never seen this movie, and I looked it up and I was like, 2015, like, awesome. Like, I'm so glad that we're getting into more modern day Cage, because I love our other patrons, but like patrons, I think Nicolas Cage is like early career, because like Nicolas Cage at one point is kind of almost like this movie to where like he's revered as like this like top tier actor in like the 80s and 90s, and then the 2000s was like there's like a shift in his career where he kind of becomes like this action star almost, with Gone to 60 Seconds, National Treasures. And then he like hits this like weird lull where he just starts doing like all of these movies as much as he can, and some of them in like that modern latter Nicolas Cage age are like fantastic, like Mandy and Color Out of Space. And then you get ones like this one, Pay the Ghost, that is just kind of like middle of the road. And that's okay. Like this is a fine film. Like there's nothing like intentionally special about it. It isn't really sure of its identity at times, but I feel like Nicolas Cage, I love that you mentioned like his facial expressions. Like Nicolas Cage is able to really captivate because of those. Like he uses his entire body. And there's one scene in particular that I mentioned earlier where he's reading Shakespeare, he's reading a play, and he's an English teacher at a university, and he's literally putting his entire body into that performance. And I feel like that's just a great visualization of how he kind of uses his entire body and his facial expressions as a whole throughout the course of this movie.
Well, even when he did Matchstick Men, some of the scenes where he was dealing with his mental issues was the same way. He used everything he had there was one where he like opened the front door and it was like all weird outside and he started having a panic attack in Matchstick Men. He's always been that way. Even as early as going back to Raising Arizona, he had scenes like that too. But if you're familiar with his career overall, he did all his big Hollywood stuff and then ran into an issue with taxes. So he just started playing whatever he could get a hold of to pay his taxes. This is real like Nicolas Cage stuff. And you end up with like, I think that was up until about 5 or 10 years ago, just before he started getting into horror and doing horror stuff. But there's a span where he was just in like the cheesiest, worst straight to video movies where he was just taking whatever he could to pay his bills and his taxes. And then you get into what he's doing now, and he's starting to become a big name again, like he used to be when he got into that action phase of Gone in 60 Seconds and movies like that.
And I mean, it works great. Like to me, like personally, I'm not trying to offend any of the other patrons out there that are suggesting more recognizable household Nicolas Cage movies. It's not my. I personally prefer the latter because I don't know what I'm getting into, and I love that.
So it's almost like it's taken his entire career to figure out he was made for horror movies. That's almost what it's like. Yeah,
that's okay. All right, so I have already thrown in my rating for this. 0 to 5. What is your rating for Pay the Ghost?
Yeah, I'd agree with yours. A 3 out of 5. It's fun to watch once, maybe twice, just to make sure you didn't miss anything. But it's by no means a giant must-see. I'm gonna love it. It's just fun for a watch or two on Halloween when you're looking for something decent and maybe a couple jump scares to watch.
Yeah, I will say that this film did get me a couple of times with the jump scares, and that's rare. That I can come into a film and truly, authentically, like, be jumped, scared, and that's one of the things that I really respected about this movie. So for us here at the Cage Corner podcast, we're going to go ahead and give this one a 3 out of 5. Thank you to all of our patrons this month that have at our $5 tier that are making this podcast possible and helping us get mental health resources into schools and conventions alike. Your support means the world to us, and you guys can go to patreon.com/victims and villains, where at $5 we will cover any Nicolas Cage movie, and for as little as $1 you guys will get a bonus episode or two every month for our Hope Out of Darkness, our Hope After Dark series, and also $2 you guys can get access to content before it even releases to our mainstream audience. But if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. There are 132 suicides that take place each and every day. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That's one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media. Call the Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope to get even more resources. And both this show and our mother show, Victims and Villains, this is the reason we create the content, so that you guys can know that there is hope. So that's going to do it for us on this month for the Cage Corner podcast. Thank you to Alan, Mark, and all of our patrons who have made these episodes possible. Until next month, keep on caging.